Welcome to the Linnean Society of London. If you know the extension of the... Please wait a moment.
Hello, my name is Mark Spencer and I am the Honorary Curator of the Smith and Linnaean Herbariums here at the Linnean Society of London. My role is to look after the Society's collection of dried plant specimens that were compiled by Linnaeus and James Edward Smith. Each herbarium is compiled of between 12 and 25,000 specimens of plant which are dried on pieces of paper sheet with labels describing where they're from and who they were collected by. And they're the basis of our understanding of plant diversity on this planet. Now, another thing about orchids is that, when it comes to natural history collections and herbariums, they make horrible specimens generally. They often are quite fleshy, and they have this strange habit of drying browny black colour, so they tend to look quite ugly as herbarium specimens, relatively speaking. Another thing about orchid flowers, because they are physically complex structures, they have got a lot going on inside them. Preparing them and pressing them to make a herbarium specimen is quite hard. To a certain extent, they can quite often look a bit like a car crash, really, like they've all crumpled up on themselves. There is one group of orchids which do make really quite beautiful herbarium specimens. Those are the lady's slippers. And the beauty of the lady's slipper extends not only into the fact they make lovely herbarium specimens, and we have Linnaeus's specimens of lady's slipper here. Orchids are plants of great beauty and glamour and economically immensely important. The international trade in orchids is worth hundreds, if not billions of dollars per year around the world, and quite a few countries, for example Thailand, have very significant export trades in these plants. So much so that some of the wild orchids are actually really now severely in trouble because their beauty has meant that people collect them avidly and aggressively. And there have been several recent examples of a new orchid species being discovered, and within a matter of weeks or months or 2 or 3 years, the populations have been virtually wiped out. We have one species of lady's slipper orchid growing wild in Britain, Cypripedium calceolus, and this is a plant which 300 years ago was locally frequent in the limestone uplands of northern England. You find it parts on the edges of Westmoreland, Yorkshire Dales and such like. No longer. It has now been reduced to one wild plant. For pretty much on and off, certainly since the Victorian era, but even into the mid-18th century, there are stories of people coming down the hillsides with wheelbarrows full of these plants that they dug up from the hillsides to sell them in the markets of the towns of northern England. Virtually every single one of those plants died, and for a period it's actually considered to have been extinct. It's a great tragedy. One of the things about the lady's slipper orchid, it's a bit like an elephant, really. Lady's slipper orchids have a very different strategy. Each plant will live for decades. They grow very, very slowly. And whilst they do produce a lot of seed, the seed of orchids is very fine and dust-like, only a tiny, tiny, tiny proportion of the seed will actually fall on a piece of ground that's suitable, find a fungus that it needs to join into, because the fungus will give the tiny developing seeds energy and grow. It's called a mycorrhizal association, and then for the plant to develop and grow. So once you've dug out dozens and dozens and dozens of plants from a Yorkshire hillside, it's not going to come back. It just can't do it. Now, thankfully, the rather marvellous people at Kew Gardens have spent an enormous amount of time over the last 30 years or so exploring the biology of the lady's slipper orchid, understanding its genetics, working out how to propagate this plant. And we've been able to get young from the and seed from the wild plant, and we have started to reintroduce young plants into the only known wild site, as well as putting some additional sites in its former territory, the north of England. So the lady's slipper orchid in England is probably having its best period in 200 years. Tragically, the outlook for some of its relatives in other parts of the world is pretty bleak. This modern trafficking in orchids, whether it be whole plants for gardening or parts of plants for traditional medicines, which is another source of a major problem for these plants, we have to manage it. So internationally we have these regulations called CITES, which are actually about prohibiting the sale and illegal trade of many wild organisms, such as these orchids or elephant tusks for that matter. Now, one of the ways we do that is by being able to look and reference collections in museums, or in this case the Linnean Society. So in the Linnean Society we have the original specimen for Cypripedium calceolus, collected by Linnaeus. These historic specimens and ones for other plants around the world we can use as reference material to confirm whether something that is coming in through a port is in fact illegally traded or not.